eyes on Capitol Hill today, where Congress just convened to begin the election certification process ahead of President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration later on this month. Now, moments from now, lawmakers in the Senate will make their way to the House chambers for that official vote count. And today also marks 4 years since the insurrection at the Capitol. That attack, of course, left about 150 law enforcement officers injured. Another 5 people were killed. Now, it was Trump that told his supporters to, quote, fight like hell during President Biden's election certification back in 2021. Trump faced federal charges for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. Those charges were dropped by special counsel Jack Smith once Trump was elected president for a second time. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now from a very snowy Washington, D.C. with more on that. Ed, what are you hearing from the Biden administration about today's election certification?
Elizabeth, good to be with you. President Biden is, if anything, at least pleased that this is going off essentially without a hitch, except for the weather perhaps. But Congress set to convene in the next hour to carry out a constitutionally required responsibility, and that is to certify the results of the Electoral College votes in all 50 states. Vice President Harris and Speaker Mike Johnson will oversee the proceedings as they're supposed to, a joint session or joint meeting of the House and the Senate to do so. He was asked last night sort of about the 4th year since January 6, 2021, and whether he thinks President-elect, former President Trump, remains a threat to democracy. Take a listen.
Do you still believe he's a threat to democracy?
I think what he did was a genuine threat to democracy. I'm hopeful that we're beyond that.
He also writes in today's Washington Post, quote, we should be proud that our democracy withstood this assault, and we should be glad we will not see such a shameful attack again this year. But we should not forget. We must remember the wisdom of the adage that any nation that forgets its past is doomed to repeat it. We cannot accept a repeat of what occurred 4 years ago. An unrelenting effort has been underway to rewrite, even erase the history of that day, to tell us we didn't see what we all saw with our own eyes, to dismiss concerns about it as some kind of partisan obsession, to explain it away as a protest that just got out of hand. That is the president reacting to what Republicans have been actively doing now for several years, and that is trying to rewrite or minimize what happened 4 years ago this afternoon, when, as you pointed out, hundreds, if not thousands, stormed the Capitol, protesting the results, trying to stop them from happening. None other than President-elect Trump, of course, has minimized his participation in that or what happened there. The facts are it was violent, it was deadly. Dozens, if not hundreds, of police officers and others were injured, and there was a real threat to a constitutionally mandated activity that is expected to unfold this afternoon without a hitch. The vice president set to participate over certifying an election she was in. She's not the first vice president to have to do this. Al Gore, of course, did it back in 2001. Richard Nixon had to certify John F. Kennedy's victory back in 1961. So history in that sense repeating itself today, but no signs, despite incredible security across Washington, of any nefarious actions or protests planned by anyone.
And Ed, it's worth noting the president's also set to visit New Orleans later on today to meet with the families of the victims of the Bourbon Street terrorist attack. Has the president given any indication on his plans for that visit?
Well, he's expected to attend a memorial service that's scheduled for tonight there in New Orleans to remember the 14 victims of the attack. And whenever he makes this kind of trip, he's eager to meet with the families directly and privately. And so if time is made for that, he will do so. And if it means delaying his departure for out west, expect that to happen. One thing we're hearing is that the governor of Louisiana is going to try to press the case directly to the president for a presidential disaster declaration, one that would provide more federal assistance to clean up and fortify the Bourbon Street area, and also to potentially help pay for counseling for the victims and their families. This is a slightly different FEMA request than, say, for a hurricane or a tornado, so we'll see what federal assistance might ultimately look like, but not surprising that the governor would use this opportunity to press his case. The president had made clear last week he was eager to get to New Orleans, and he's able to do so because he's headed off to California next and was scheduled to go today anyway. So in essence, it's a stop along the way.
Yeah, well, he's got a full schedule today and also throughout the week. And he also met with the Venezuelan president-elect today at the White House. Can you tell us what came out of that meeting?
So Edmundo Gonzalez Urrutia he was the winner of he was the runner-up in an officially declared presidential election in Venezuela, but the United States and other governments recognized him as the duly elected leader because of fraud that was committed in that election. Urrutia is here for a meeting with Biden today, a last-minute chance really for the Biden administration to emphasize that it believes he won the election and is the duly elected leader of Venezuela and should be leading that country when a formal inauguration is held this month. But by holding this meeting now, so close to the end of his administration, it's also signaling that there's very little, much more that the Biden administration at least can do to shore up democracy in that country. And there's a belief, there have been reports that the Trump administration is talking to Nicolas Maduro, who declared himself the winner of that election, about staying on and making changes in various ways to that country's relationship with the United States and others in the Western Hemisphere. So in essence today, this meeting is designed to reinforce the Biden administration's support for someone who is unlikely to ever take power, at least not in the short term.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Ed, this is the final days of Biden's administration. You have some reporting on the president's final speeches to the public. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this is the beginning of the first of two final full weeks of the Biden presidency. He's set to deliver, or we expect him to deliver next week, a major foreign policy address designed to sort of button up all the work he did over his 4 years, but also over the course of his vice presidency and his time in the Senate, trying to reiterate and emphasize the work that he did across the world. As president, of course, it would be shoring up NATO and protecting Ukraine, the recent work in the Mideast, restoring or expanding relationships with Indo-Pacific countries and the concerns about China. We'll see to what extent he talks about withdrawing from the war in Afghanistan, which of course had broad public support, but then was criticized for the way it was handled. And then after that, we're expecting a farewell address to the nation at some point later next week. That's a more formal, traditional one that an outgoing president gives. What the format is, where he gives it, when he gives it is still unclear, but his predecessors all did it, and we expect the president will focus on his accomplishments more broadly as he counts down the days. Remember, this week he goes from here to New Orleans to California, back here for the Jimmy Carter funeral, then flies Thursday to Rome to meet with the Pope, and is back here over the weekend ahead of those speeches next week. Busy schedule.
To say the least. All right, Ed O'Keefe, live for us from the very snowy White House today. Thanks so much, Ed.